Danielle Smith. I am guest hosting on behalf of Common Sense Calgary, and we are interviewing the candidates for Calgary City Council in the upcoming election this fall. I'm joined now by Ward 8 Council candidate Paul Bergmann. Paul, thanks so much for being with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Danielle.
Yeah, my pleasure. So tell me, why did you decide to run for office?
I've spent the last 5 years working with Build Calgary, so I've got a home builder background, and I just saw a lot of what was going on at council. I spent a bunch of time down there in chambers, and it was disappointing for me. There was some, whether it be the decisions they were making about how to spend money, or there was some general decorum issues I had problems with as well. So it was sort of a combination of things.
Well, I'd love to talk to you from a developer's perspective, because as you know, the community guide has been very much in the news and very controversial. What's your take on it?
Well, you're right. The guidebook for greater communities has been a big news topic lately. I've watched it develop over the last couple of years. I sit on Build Calgary's Intercity Redevelopment Committee, and so we've had a chance to look at it as it's been in development. And you're right. There's some controversial pieces to it. There are good pieces. It's not a complete, a totally bad policy, but there's a couple of pieces in the residential section which has got the communities, rightfully so, up at arms. They feel a real lack of ability to define their communities. So when the city says that this is just a guidebook, it's the building blocks to allow communities to define their community through the local area plan process, that is true. The problem is that the pieces that the communities are looking for on the residential side to give definition to their communities don't exist in the options given to them by the city. So the city, I think, is not telling an untruth. They're not lying in the sense that the process of the LAP is where the communities really get to define their community. But without those granular pieces or definition of what's the difference between an R1 or an R2 or an RCG fourplex, the communities don't have real control. So it's a bit of a shell game, or whatever you want to call it.
Can you explain what is it the developer and the home builder community is wanting to achieve out of this plan? I'm sort of a little torn on understanding, is it driven by administration, or is it being driven by what developers and home builders want to do? Give me your take on it.
I think it's truly driven by administration. This is an administration-driven plan. It falls out of the municipal development plan, which in itself falls out of the South Saskatchewan regional plan, which is another government policy that is even higher level than the municipal development plan. What I think the builders want out of this is some sort of certainty about where they can build. Let's make no mistake that the communities are upset because they feel the developers are, they're constantly in fights with the developer. Let's make it well known that the developers are feeling the same way. The developers don't want to spend a year trying to get a development permit on something to then have it turned down, and they've wasted, they've spent $500,000 or $1 million buying a piece of land, and they can't do anything with it. This existing system does not serve either party well, and so I think the developers are looking for some sort of certainty and some way to stop the fight.
Yeah. So give me some sense of what you think the balance should be, because I think what we've seen over the last number of years is that council's taken the view that they want to densify and build up. And there's always that pressure. Do you do that, or do you do new greenfield development? There was 10 communities that wanted to proposals that were put forward that have been on pause. It doesn't mean that they're not ever going to develop, but there does seem to be a sense that densification and building up is the priority instead of building new greenfield. Is that how you see it, or do you think there's a different way to approach it?
Well, that's very much administration's approach, and there are some good pieces to that. I think if you follow some of the more popular blogs on the internet, or the websites like strongtowns.org or notjustbikes.com. There's some great learnings there to help all of us understand how expensive it is to develop at the edges. We need some of that. There's a demand for that. The greenfield subdivisions need to continue to be built. But at the same time, I think it makes financial sense for the city to densify those existing communities in the inner city. And now it's just a matter of striking that right balance. I think the communities are concerned that developers are going to run in, if this guidebook is adopted as is, and build a fourplex right next to the, in the middle of the R1 neighborhoods close to the Central Park. I don't think that's going to happen because the cost to do that doesn't make economic sense. Having said that, I can understand the community's frustration with their lack of say about what their community looks like going into the future. And I think if we gave them some comfort about where you're going to put those fourplexes, or where they can put their R1s and their single families, they would be amenable to developing at the edges, developing on the busy streets, et cetera, which is what I think the city really wants to do in the first place. So there's a balance on the inner city piece in terms of where you develop. I heard an interesting statistics the other day. I think I heard that Mount Royal, the area of Mount Royal, is the most densified community in the city. It's already got a massive amount of densification happening on 17th Avenue and the surrounding streets. So it's not like they aren't willing to densify. And you talk to the communities, they understand densification has to take place. It's a matter now of balance between that inner city piece and the subdivisions on the edges, which we're going to need both. If we hope to be financially stable in 20 or 30 years from now, we need both, and there needs to be a compromise to get some development happening in the city as well as on the edges.
Could you talk a bit about affordability and some of the aspects that are leading to Calgary not being as affordable as it was in the past? It does strike me that a lot of these delays do just end up going into the cost of whatever construction ultimately comes about. Is there something that, from your perspective, you would say could be streamlined so that we're able to keep first-time home buyers in the market so that they have affordable houses they can buy?
Oh boy, affordability is a really, it's something that we've been struggling with for quite some time. We've noted to start with that when you add additional layers of regulation or permitting, et cetera, you drive up the cost of housing. And that has happened substantially to all builders in new and inner city areas over the last 10 years. It's been a constant trend of increasing costs. So affordability is going down. But I don't think that there's any one area to blame. We're talking recently in a blog or an email chain that I was involved with between community members and great community discussion about affordability. It's pretty well known that if densifying the city core doesn't necessarily create affordability. Everybody would like to think it does, because the more housing that's on the market, the cheaper the price would be. The problem is that the land is valued at what it is in the market today, and our building costs are what they are today. And it's not like, excuse me, it's not like you can magically eliminate any of those costs and drive the end price down. The prices are what the prices are. So simply densifying the city core does not give you affordability. But are there ways? Certainly, again, developing communities at the edge is a solution that we need to have. We need to have those communities at the edges because they do provide affordable houses. But they also come at a cost, a long-term cost to the city that we have to make sure we're keeping track of in the process of developing those communities. The real opportunity, I think, for affordable housing in Calgary, the largest landowner in Calgary is the city of Calgary. They have a lot of lots and land in inventory. And if we can have a discussion about how to bring some of that land to the market, that's one of the opportunities I think we have to develop a truly affordable housing, below market priced housing. Now that comes with some risks as well. And I hope I don't shift gears on you here when I bring up the issue of Richmond Green golf course, the old golf course. And so one of the frustrating things living in Ward 8, as I do, is to see the city, without any community engagement, take what was listed previously as a regional park up there with North Hill Park and many of the other parks in Calgary. And without really a lot of discussion, they delisted that park from the list of regional parks. And then they hived off 5 or 6 acres and put it out to the market to see if anybody wanted to buy it, to develop it under an MU zoning, which would allow, there's talk of up to 9 stories. And across the street from that would be single family houses in the community of Rutland Park. And I don't know if that's the right solution or not. I don't know if that's reasonable or not, but I do know the process the city used to get to this stage is completely inappropriate. There's been no community engagement with this decision. And it's a real concern it should be a concern for all Canadians, whether they're in Ward 8 and they know anything about Richmond Green or not. It should be a real concern for all of Calgarians, because who's to say that the city council might not delist Nose Hill or some other Lindsay Park or some other park that's well known and just decide to sell it and build condos on it.
All great points, because I think there probably is an opportunity for the city to develop some of its areas, but they want to make sure that you're developing the right areas with community buy-in. One more thing I want to layer on, it's a bit awkward because I think developers have really been, there hasn't been a very collaborative or positive relationship, just from an outside observation, with city council. And I wonder if anyone is asking you questions about whether your closeness to the developer community would put you in a position of conflict of interest, or does that give you a perspective that maybe has been missing from council for the past decade or so? How do you see it?
I think both those things are true. I think people have said to me, you can't be trusted. You're part of them. But I do believe, and what I've said to people in my conversations with them, and we've had some Zoom calls with community members here in the community, and the conversation has been primarily guidebook. And I have said, to your second point, I believe that I can bring some additional, what's the word I'm looking for? Compromise, ability to have a bridge the gap between builders, developers, and community members, because I'm both. I'm a community member in Ward 8. I've lived pretty much my life in Ward 8. I went to high school, elementary or junior high, all of them here in Ward 8. And so clearly I'm a community member, and I understand some of the struggles and frustrations of the builder community. I understand both, and I'd like to believe that I can bridge that gap by having open and honest conversations.
Well, let's talk then about the outgoing incumbent, Evan Woolley, who's chosen not to run again. If you look at his record over the last 4 years, is there any decisions that he's made that you would have done differently?
Evan's been involved in a lot of issues at City Calgary. And first of all, let me say that anybody who steps into the public realm, they take a risk of exposing themselves to a lot of criticism. So I want to thank Evan for his service to the city. It's not an easy job to be in the spotlight 24/7. Having said that, Evan has been involved with a lot of files. And so there's probably bound to be, simply by the vast quantity of files he's been involved with, there's bound to be some controversy. I think there's 14 committees at City Hall, and I think in the last couple of years, if I'm not mistaken, Evan has sat on all 14. So he's tried to cover a lot of ground. And maybe he didn't do it as effectively as he could have. I know there was an issue recently where some funds were not properly allocated within the offsite levies fund, and I think there was some upset builders because they have donated $400 million to this offsite levies fund, and it wasn't very well accounted for. And so, sitting on the audit committee as Evan did, there's that probably snuck by him. And maybe if he had another chance to review that, he'd probably have a little more diligence in tracking down where all that money was. $60 million of it disappeared. Now, did it disappear? No, it didn't disappear. It's not like somebody put it in their pocket and walked away. Nobody absconded with funds. But did it get accounted for properly and appropriately? No, it didn't. And so maybe we can do some things to track our money a little bit better. And that's not.
Yeah. So is there? So Evan Woolley may have had too broad a range of interests, but is there a danger that your interests are too narrow, that you're too focused on the development side? Do you have any expertise in some of the other areas that City Council would deal with?
So what I'd like to believe I can bring to the table is some common sense approach to financing. Over the course of the past 20 years in my development history, lots of it outside of Calgary, by the way, so I don't have too many housing projects that people would be mad at me about if I could poke fun at myself. I think that where I've accumulated a really good understanding of really the basics of what we're doing here is on the finance side. And that's where I want to focus my time and effort. I think everything runs to the budget numbers. And if I can bring some sense about where we're making money and where we aren't making money, I think I can add a lot to the discussion at City Hall. Well,
then let's talk a bit about the spending side. Do you think the city is spending too little, too much, or have they got it about right?
Nobody wants higher taxes. So I think that's universal. And as a result, I think everybody thinks the city is spending too much money. And I would fall into that category as well. But I know there's some challenges at the city as well. If you look at, when they take in $1 and they have to give 40 cents of it to the province right away, that can really impact your bottom line. When the province demands that they have certain programs that they fund and run, it also puts constraints on what they can do. Where I might look at City Hall differently, and again, I'm not 100% certain that these are the answers, but some of my areas of interest are things like, 10 years ago, there were 25 lawyers in the law department. There's now 75. We are spending $1 million a day on community engagement, communications. We have 350 people in the communications department. And considering what's gone on with the guidebook, I don't know how effectively that money is being spent. We have I've worked over the past 5 years with some really talented people in the planning department. Is it the size that it should be, considering the number of development permits that are happening in the city of Calgary right now? I don't know that that's the case. But again, it requires a little bit more investigation. I do know that labor was 30% of the city's total budget when 10, 12 years ago, when our present mayor, Mr. Nenshi, came to office. And we're now at 50% of our budget is spent on labor. Now, David Duckworth, talented guy, would tell you that we're at a head count the same level as what we were in 2013. I think somewhere there's something broken about that. There's some folks out there right now that say take back City Hall and cut taxes, and that's their primary message. And there's some sense to that. There's some sense to us looking at our budgets in a real thoughtful, complete fashion, and that needs to be done. Because we do have a problem at City Hall in that we don't have enough money for what we're spending.
Do you think it could be done in across the board cuts and then just force administration to deal with the lower budget? Or do you think it can be done surgically? I guess I'm kind of getting at the relationship between the council member and administration, because so much is led by administration. And I wonder what you would bring to the role that would allow you to implement a more surgical approach in some of the things we're talking about.
Well, I think surgical is important. I think that what we've heard consistently over the years is that if there are any budget cuts, it's going to impact frontline service. And I think there might be some, but I think there's also an opportunity to pick various departments and or levels of administration and be a little more surgical about it. The only person that council hires and fires is the city manager. And so David Duckworth is the real connection between council and administration. And so if council does decide in the future to put a 10% across the board budget cuts, I think it's going to land on David Duckworth and the senior management team to then decide where those cuts take place. And if that was to happen, it would be my desire to really encourage administration to be surgical about it. Don't just cut all the frontline employees. That we need to address this throughout the management hierarchy within the city administration.
All right, let's deal with the revenue side of things, because periodically, every few years, it seems like new taxation powers are being proposed. First, it was through the AUMA and the municipal councils. Then it was through the city charter discussion. And then there was another report last year that came out. How do you feel about new tax powers for the city?
I'm not a fan. I think that, first of all, before you go clamoring for new sources of revenue, you need to really explore the expense side of your budget. I think people are not at all comfortable or happy with a council who spends a lot of time talking about new revenue. It wears on people. People are in tough financial straits themselves. People have cut. People have adjusted their own personal budgets, and I think they expect that out of their corporate civic leaders as well. And so, not interested in new revenue sources. That's a wrong path to go down. We need to talk about how we control our expenses.
All right, so we've seen a couple of tax shifts. So first of all, the tax shift from the downtown business core to the outlying small businesses in the Beltline and other areas, which created such a burden that we're now talking about a tax shift from the business community to the residential community. So if you're going to be reliant on property taxes as the principal source of revenue, how do you address that problem?
There's no easy solution. People already feel that they spend too much on their taxes. I know that when I lived inner city, owned a house, my taxes doubled from the year I bought the house till the year I sold it, about a 12 or 14 year period. And I was not happy because from my perspective, I wasn't getting any more services. They still came around and collected my garbage once a week. They still, unfortunately, we didn't want them clearing the snow off our streets because we didn't need them down the street, but they did anyway. The services they provided didn't change, but my taxes went up substantially. And sorry, let me get back to your question. Please re-ask it because
I'm wondering about the tax shift because we're seeing a couple of things and it's sort of maybe double layers. And so let me deal with it in the first layer. Do you support the tax shift from the business community to the residential community. Is that the right move?
I think it's the only move we have at this point. It's not my preferred route, but considering where we get our revenues from, the majority of our revenues from, it's one of the only routes we have. So if we're having to address revenue, I think we're going to have to increase residential taxes. We've lost that 30% of the tax base that we used to get from the downtown core. The small businesses, the commercial landlords are absolutely getting hammered because of that tax shift. And so I think we have to, but I don't want to. I think we need to go back to this discussion about expenses. Let's focus on how we can deal with the expense side. And yes, we're going to have to figure out a splitting of the tax burden between commercial, residential, downtown, and nobody's going to be happy in that. Let's really focus on that expense side.
I think a lot of people hope that downtown will just continue to attract new businesses and it will get back to the way it was before, but it's an enormous problem. I think I'd heard it quantified that there's enough vacancy that could accommodate 100 to 140,000 employees. That's how much it's been hollowed out. Do you have any thoughts on how to attract businesses back downtown, or what to do about all that vacancy in downtown?
I think there's some really smart minds that are trying to address this right now. And so whether it be, commercial landlords, the commercial leasing agents, there's lots of good ideas out there that I think we need to tap into. And certainly converting some of those commercial spaces into residential spaces, that sounds great, but I don't know that it's really doable. And so I'm all for trying. I'm all for exploring those options, but I don't know how viable an option that particular one is. Maybe there's some options around light industrial or light commercial being put downtown. We've got some spare capacity, I think, in terms of street, traffic on the streets. So maybe we can accommodate some of those more commercial vehicles down there. But this is not a simple issue. What I am very happy about is that over the last couple of months, last 6 months, and it's been growing in momentum, is the number of high-tech companies coming to Calgary. We've really done a great job in raising funds for these sorts of organizations and bringing new people to downtown. So I don't think we're going to fill it with oil and gas workers. We might get a few back, but I think we need to focus on alternatives, and there are a lot of discussions about that right now.
Do you think that the best way to attract business is by getting the tax picture right, or do you think that giving direct grants or subsidies is the route to follow? The Calgary Economic Development was given $100 million to aid in business attraction. Do you support that kind of approach?
That was a big number, and I'm not sure that if you look at their track record, I'd have to investigate it a little more, but how many direct parties did they bring to the table? And everybody needs to be accountable for their budgets. So I haven't looked into it enough to be able to speak, fully on it, but we need to be able to hold whatever department it is accountable for some sort of goals. And so if Calgary Economic Development Authority is putting that money to good use and actually shows results because of it, then that sort of granting process is okay. But it's only part of the program. It really does need to be a fulsome approach to how we treat and welcome businesses into Calgary, and the tax rate is a big part of that. Another part, I mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation, was this issue about additional costs that are put on the by the city to whatever it is you might be doing. And certainly in the commercial space, downtown space, a development permit to repurpose one of the floors in downtown Calgary. In talking to the commercial people that I've talked to, it's very expensive. It's not something that you can do easily. So if you wanted to take, a blank space and turn it into something, the development and building permits associated with that are substantial. So I think there's places that we can cut some of those burdens and make it more efficient and easier for businesses to try and get downtown. And I think that's what we need to do.
All right, so we talked a lot about the operating budget. Let's now switch to talking about the capital budget, because there's been a number of big ticket items that have been approved over the last number of years. So let's begin with the Green Line, which began as a three-party arrangement where all three levels of government would fund it. It would be $4.5 billion. It'd be 40 kilometers, stretching to the north, stretching to the south. Looked like a great idea, except for now it is only half the size and it's already above that budget. And you've got the transportation minister saying he doesn't like the proposal because it doesn't connect into the existing transit system. So how would you address that issue?
I have no doubt that when this project started, it made sense. I don't think it does anymore. I think if any portion of it makes sense, it's probably the south leg. But I'm very disappointed that the solution on the table right now to go from downtown north is, first of all, a big bridge through Princess Island Park. I'm not enthralled by that solution. And then going up Center Street, cleaving that community of Crescent Heights in half is just so disappointing. When I look at the Calgary Transportation Plan and plans around the Green Line, the pastel-colored, hand-colored pictures picture those stops along Center Street North as very idyllic, welcoming sort of places to be. And I don't, knowing what I know about light rail transit and the other stations I've seen in Calgary, I don't think that's the case. I think truly it would cleave that community in half, and instead of adding to the community in that Center Street stretch, I think it would be not a great project for that piece. So I'm not at all a fan of the North Hill plan. And then what comes up next in the discussion is, how do you pay for it? And I don't think the case is there anymore. Whether it be that tri-party funding that's falling apart that you're referring to, whether we haven't even really addressed the ridership issue in the last couple of years. And the rationale for that project, I don't think exists anymore. There aren't a lot of people going to downtown that would ride that leg of the LRT. I don't think we can justify it, particularly at a time when we're fighting just a basic revenue and expense budgetary conversation. To throw that into the mix, I think it's irresponsible.
So scrap the whole thing, or did I hear you say you like the south leg but not the north leg?
I don't necessarily like the south leg, but I could hold my nose and have it go through. I think if any area of town requires some new infrastructure and a new connection, it's that part of town. But I think there are lots of other options with regards to the north.
Let's then talk about some of the other big ticket items. The event center built in conjunction with the Calgary Flames, the BMO center expansion for new convention space. Number 3, the Arts Common transformation. And number 4, the Foothills Fieldhouse. Now, when the city voted to approve these projects, they did so against the advice of the city CFO, who said that the city could only afford one of them. Do you think the city made the right decision?
I think the councillors might have listened a little closer to the CFO. Any one of those 4 projects is a big project, and there's no doubt that they are community building projects. But to attack them all at once I don't think the right decision. I do know that BMO expansion on Stampede Park. Much as I hated seeing the Stampede Corral disappear, and particularly that landmark sort of neon sign on the front, which represented a whole bunch of history to many Calgarians, myself included. It was sad to see it go, but I think at some point you've got to move forward. And as a business, that BMO Center, I think, makes really good sense to have a world-class convention center, as we would. I think that makes great sense for the city of Calgary. It'll bring in a lot of business, a lot of trickle-down sort of economic activity.
So I was going to ask, and I think you just answered it, if you could choose only one of those 4 projects, am I hearing you say that the BMO's convention expansion would have been the one?
If I only had one to pick, yes, probably that would be the one. But because I think that's got such a strong business case behind it, I think you could probably get away with the second one. And I think the entertainment district is another opportunity to revitalize a part of downtown Calgary and bring some real good trickle-down impacts to the economy around there. So I much as I love the Saddle Dome and it's iconic, and everybody around, pretty much North America knows the shape of that and can identify that as a Calgary landmark, I think it's time to move on. And I think we have an opportunity with those 2 projects where they are to really have a positive impact on the city.
All right, so let's see. I've just got a few final questions here. Let me ask you about snow removal. I was surprised to hear you say that you didn't need to have residential snow clearing on the street that you had lived on, because, boy, snow removal really became a huge issue in December. And I'm wondering if you could tell us what you're hearing from the residents of Ward 8. What are they saying?
Well, I haven't heard any discussion about that specifically. My personal experience might be different than the majority of folks. I was lucky enough to live in a community that had quite wide streets. Most people had SUVs, and so that the specifics around that conversation, I think, are different than the general public. And I think you're right. When we had our big snowstorm, there were a lot of people stranded. There were a lot of people that were accidentally locked in by the plows that were trying to clear the roads. They in fact caused some additional problems. I think we need, in those instances where there is an unusual situation, I think we really need to be able to respond to the snow removing in inner community streets. Having said that, I think what I've seen, I think, is a trend over the last 30 years where maybe we don't like buying winter tires anymore because they cost a lot of money, right? They do. Let's be honest. And so I think somehow, we've got to balance that between community members buying some winter tires and the city making sure that the narrow streets that are fully packed with snow are properly shoveled. And there's a balance.
For the record, I swear by my winter tires. So I'm not one of the ones who don't think you should have winter tires. Let me ask you about privatization and contracting out. Is that a potential solution? Do you think that there's an issue with the budget on snow removal, or do you think it's how they're removing snow? Because there have been suggestions perhaps that we need to have more private sector contracting there, maybe on golf courses as well, operation, maybe as well on garbage collection. Do you see a role for the private sector?
Absolutely. I'm a big private sector advocate. I think that there needs to be some partnership between public and private for many of those things you mentioned, whether it be operating park space, garbage collection, those sorts of things. I think we have to be respectful of those employees of the city of Calgary that have been there for many, many years. And we need to treat them with the respect and dignity that they deserve. And we also need to search out different solutions for these issues that are showing up. I don't know about this budgetary item. It's one that I really want to investigate. I do know that when I watch what's happening in the city, I live close to 2nd Street by the Holy Cross Hospital. And this winter, we put in what's called a complete street, bike lanes on both sides with hard barriers between those and the parking and or traveling lanes. And everybody I've talked to since then is very frustrated by that street because it used to be quite big and wide open and allow for all of that traffic to happen naturally. And since those all those barriers, et cetera, have gone up, I watched the city crews, and I'm going from memory here. There was 2 city trucks. There was about 6 dump trucks. There was a grader. There was 3 bobcats, and there was a half a dozen to 8 city employees. And when I talked to them about it, there was very much frustration on their part because they couldn't address the regular ramps, the wheelchair access, et cetera, et cetera. And it took all of that equipment 1 hour to clear 1 block of that street. And so I think we forget what the maintenance cost of a lot of these things are. And so we've got to, I think, ratchet back some of our expectations about what we can provide to people, because the costs are horrendous. And so private.
What a great example.
Public-private partnerships, absolutely.
Let me ask you about the Defund the Police movement, which in the end, I think, turned into identifying a portion of the police budget to be reallocated to other social agencies to assist with calls regarding mental health and addictions. Do you support that movement?
To use an old phrase, I back the blue. I very much appreciate the community safety that the police force brings to us. And you know, you look at various jurisdictions that have defunded their police, and now they're looking to refund their police because crime has shot through the roof. Having said that, if I get my count right, listening to Diane Colley-Urquhart talk to the police service over the budgetary discussions that happened earlier this year, late last year. If I'm not mistaken, there are 26 non-core programs, I'll call them, that the City of Calgary Police are responsible for. Whether it be those DOPE programs, community outreach programs, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not sure the most effective way to address some of those social services is with a highly trained, high cost, very relevant police department going and helping mental health victims on the street when they're in distress. So I think there needs to be some breaking apart of those services to true police services, and then the sort of social services that right now they're providing, and maybe better provided by another service provider.
All right. I'm interested in hearing your perspective on fire, which is also another big funding or spending source for the City of Calgary. One of the debates that happened in the last year was about whether these 10 new communities should be built and whether there would be enough resources to build fire and support fire halls there. And I'm kind of interested because you come from a development perspective. What is the right answer there? How do you continue to build and then also make sure that the services are provided?
That is the ultimate question we have with greenfield developments. And it's not just about fire. It's about pipes in the ground, pavement, parks, sewage treatment plants, et cetera, et cetera. Fire is just one of the many aspects of that conversation. I don't know enough about the fire department to speak to it specifically. It seems to be the department in the city that flies under the radar, maybe because the police department is taking all the heat right at this point in time, or maybe because we've set a standard for the fire department that we just assume has to be done. And that is, you know, a 10-minute response time from, if I remember correctly, it's a 10-minute response time from that station to any point in the area that they're supposed to cover. Now, that's a pretty high standard. And I don't know if it's the right answer to take that number from 10 minutes to 15 minutes. I don't know if that's the case. I do know that there's been a lot of building initiatives. The high intensity residential fires regulations, they were called HERF regulations, were put in place a couple of years ago to decrease the chances of fires happening, jumping roof to roof to roof in subdivisions, as we saw many years ago. So we're decreasing the chances of fires happening in a residential area consistently. Year over year over year, we put in regulations for the builders that decrease the possibility of fire. If we're doing that, would we then not look at the fire response times and standards and ask, well, can we ratchet those back now because we've done such a good job of building these new communities? Maybe there is some sense to that.
All right. I've got just a couple more questions. Public art, are you happy with the program, or do you think some of the changes they've made are going to address some of the problems we've had in the past with public art being produced? I think everybody thinks of the big blue ring that did not get community support.
Yeah, there's the big blue ring. There's the Beaufort Towers. There's out by COP. There's been a lot of controversy about public art, and I am a big supporter of art. I love having it around. I love it. It clearly, when you look at the economic analysis of it, there is benefit that public art and public artworks bring to a community when you have money and when you can afford it. And I'm not sure at this point in time, considering the struggles we're having with revenue versus expense discussions, that's something that we can afford. I can't speak to the most recent changes and the new contract that was just awarded. I can't speak to it, so I shouldn't go on and speak specifically to it other than those general comments I just made.
Got it, no problem. On the issue of when you decide as a council member versus when you let the people decide, we have seen a referenda on the Olympics. We are going to have a referenda on fluoride, but council made a decision not to have a referenda on reducing residential speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. What do you think they should have done on those issues? Going to the people, is that the right decision, or making the decision as a council?
With so many of these things, it's a balancing act. I think part of the reason there was so much acrimony about these issues in the public over the last year is that I think our city council has lost the moral right to govern. I think that there's so many people unhappy with so many of the council members that's why they were calling for these actions and initiatives. And I quite honestly, I can't blame them. The reality is, though, that we elect our council members to make decisions, and that's what we need them to do. But they have to have the moral support of the community to do so. And we've seen, as you said, in those three examples you just mentioned, I don't think they had the moral authority to make those decisions. I think there are a lot of frustrated people. So yeah, I don't think they had the moral authority to do what they did, but
got it.
They have to make a decision.
Got it. So let me ask you one final question about, again, the balance, because you're elected as an independent by the people of Ward 8. So what if there was a decision you had to make that your ward constituents were telling you they wanted you to vote one way, but the city administration was arguing for the benefit of the city as a whole that you should do the opposite? Where would you fall on that?
Well, I think we've seen some of that already with regards to the guidebook, to bring this conversation full circle. The administration is really, with regards to the guidebook and other examples, they have been, administration, I think, to a large degree, has been driving council versus the other way around. I think the conversation has to shift. I think council has to act and make decisions based on the fact that they're a board of directors for a $4 billion corporation. And so they need to, I think, make decisions that may be against the administration's wishes, but because we have to remember, those are really talented people down at city administration, very talented. But they have some of their own reasons sometimes for bringing legislation to council that they believe should be put in place that isn't necessarily the right thing for the city. So I think it's a balance. Again, it's a balancing act, but I think that city council has to take back some of that. It needs to be a little more downward delegation versus upward delegation. I always one of the sort of three main things in my campaign is this concept of engagement and transparency. And I think it's important that if I vote for something other than what my constituents would like to see, I have to be very open and honest about why I'm doing that. And I don't think that happens at this point, and I think it needs to from this point going forward. I need to be accountable to those people, and if I don't vote the way they would like me to, they need to know why very clearly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I appreciate your time.
Danielle, thank you very much, and let the fun begin. It's going to be a fun next 6 months to October 18th, and I look forward to it.
Yes, you bet it will be. That is your Ward 8 candidate, Paul Bergmann.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.